All right, so I wanted to kind of introduce career counseling with this concept of what is work to us, what is, and how do we structure our schemas around work. And I like to go back to counseling theories that maybe we've covered before. In particular, for me, Adlerian is kind of my approach, and so I have a lot of concepts that kind of come from there as that's sort of my schema. And I also really like some existential pieces that I think are purposeful in discussing what and how we relate to work and our life purpose. And so this is the kind of idea of finding purpose within our work realm as well as in our life realm and our spiritual realm. I think that that's kind of important to look at that holistic piece of finding purpose. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from as far as career counseling. That's kind of my introduction to that, is how do we find purpose in our work and how do we help our clients do that? So the idea of work comes from lots of different areas. You can be paid for work, you can be volunteering, you could be doing work that is unpaid. So is it your vocation, your career? Is it a calling? What kind of meaning do we give to this aspect that we spend engaging in effort, and kind of how do we define that work? And that's defined by different cultures in different ways. It's defined by different people in different ways. So that's kind of the idea of what does this mean for us? And I think that's important to identify as a career counselor, and then also as what does it mean for your clients as they come to you for help in this career path, and what does work need to mean for them, and what does that look like? What is their schema for work? So as far as kind of going about this is some of the counseling methods and approaches that you already are familiar with. So individual psychology, or Alfred Adler's kind of views on work, was that we have different life tasks and different realms that we are engaging in with our life, right? So work was one of those life tasks that we need to be successful in order to feel like we have significance, right? Because we're always striving for superiority or striving for significance. So he says that, we're making mistakes along that way. That's where our feelings of inferiority might come into play. But the idea is that people are always striving to feel significant, so to count, to matter, and to bring something to the table, basically. The life means also to be interested in our fellow man, our fellow humankind, and to be contributing in some way to the welfare of the humankind. So that's that social interest piece. So both of those, I feel like sometimes are related to people's work professions, that we want to find significance, we want to count, we want to matter. We also want to contribute to the society around us. So those pieces are sometimes important to consider in working with clients, maybe something that is also driving you in the career path that you're choosing, right? So Adler's views on the importance of work was the work is the most important task of living. And we spend a lot of time engaging in work, right? In efforts that are considered work. So the reasons for work can include lots of different purposes, right? That could be economic reasons, it could be financial pieces that we're looking at. It may be to be trading goods and services. It may to be able to afford some comforts or some leisure time or extravagance, luxury, right? There's lots of different pieces of that. There's also psychological purposes, such as forming an identity in how we count and how we contribute. So our work tasks may also include these pieces of how we express ourselves, who we are. You can get really attached to kind of those identity pieces. I've had several, particularly athletes, who went into the professional athletic field, and they struggle when an injury or something has come into their life that causes them to have to shift careers, because they very much identify with being that athlete. So I had a ballerina, and when COVID hit, that just really hit the performance industry a lot. She really struggled with shifting careers. A lot of her fellow co-workers in the ballet company that she was in was having to do the same thing and shift. So several of them were finding new jobs and new careers, but it was a huge loss for her as far as identity goes and shifting. So it's really important to kind of recognize that work can be a bigger piece for a lot of people than just a way to make money, that it can include that identity piece, that feelings of counting, that gives them meaning, purpose, self-esteem, self-efficacy, right? Self-worth. And that can be all wrapped up into what we do for a living, right? Also, Adler's views again tie into that social interest, that we have a space and a place where we feel valued, where we contribute, where other people appreciate us, right? So that social interaction within work and co-workers, colleagues, we have this mini culture that we become a part of. So that's kind of the Adlerian view of work. And so I kind of come at it from that aspect. So there's a lot of pieces of work beyond making a living. And oftentimes social interest is a piece of that. So social interest, again, is just we value that human capacity to transcend ourselves and contribute to society. And that can be really important. That altruism piece of that is really important for some people. That feeling of community, that belonging to somewhere. I have worked in places where that is non-existent, where you don't feel like it's a community, where you feel like you're competing, where you feel like there is kind of infighting and you can't really trust each other as coworkers. That work environment was very unhealthy, that you couldn't trust anyone, you couldn't really talk openly. And so you didn't really belong. You weren't really treated as a piece and a part of this group, of this community. So I try to also look for that, what work environments are helpful for people versus hurtful for people. And oftentimes that is something that will bring clients into career counseling as well, is that their workplace is not a place where they feel like they belong anymore. It's a workplace where maybe they have something has happened to cause conflict, and that can be a huge stressor when they no longer feel like they belong. They are being ostracized from that group of some sort in some way. That's happened to several of my clients. Particularly when I'm not even working as a career counselor, right? So that comes to play in lots of different modalities. So you may have that in an outpatient clinic, mental health counseling, and that all kind of gets wrapped up together. So another big piece of this is that that concept of life satisfaction and feeling like we're leading a purposeful life. So again, that's kind of that striving for significance, right? And Adler believed that our true happiness, our true life satisfaction is going to be related to that social interest, to feeling like we count and we contribute. So when we're unhappy, we're anxious or depressed, that we are oftentimes, because we're not feeling like we are part of the community, we're not feeling like we're contributing, that we don't have the courage to contribute, to try to contribute, because we fear that rejection, right? So that feeling of inferiority comes into play. So that's kind of the unhealthy version, as we don't feel like we're a part, we don't feel like we can contribute. And so that's a big piece of kind of how I wrap my head around our clients need to feel like they're contributing through their work as well. So we can feel that sense of worth in what we're doing for our society, for our families, right? And it may not be that they contribute to the overall, they may be contributing to something else, but there's usually some higher purpose to their work calling than making a paycheck, right? Viktor Frankl is another one of the theorists that I really like. And he is the founder of logotherapy, or existential therapy. He states there's 3 avenues at which we arrive to find meaning in our lives. And these 3 are: 1, creating a work or doing a deed. So we're creating something or doing something. We're experiencing something or encountering someone. So it's either by creating or doing something, experiencing or encountering someone. And the third thing is by the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. So how we perceive the struggles that we're going to face in life is how we arrive at meaning. So it's how we're operating within the world, how we're operating with others, and then how we perceive that reality that we're living in. So that's really kind of how we can help our clients, right? Is on those 3 areas: what they are choosing to do, how they're choosing to interact with the world, how they're choosing to interact with others, and then how they're perceiving that, how they're interacting within their intrapsyche. Those are the 3 kind of realms that I feel like we are working with in career counseling as well. So by giving himself another purpose or reason to love, we can find meaning. And that's how we find that sense of worth in ourselves, right? Is kind of the idea of existentialism, that we can bear almost any suffering. I love that. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about how we can, anyone who can find a why to the struggle and the sorrow and the things that we face can live through anything and still maintain that altruism, that human kindness that allows us to be part of human society. So it's really key there. So the other thing that's important with Adler and kind of his concept of the kind of indivisible self, that's kind of coming out of Myers and Sweeney's work with Adlerian therapy. He talks about those different parts of ourselves, but the other piece of that is that creative self. And sometimes that can get lost in the monotony of our day-to-day. And so I think that's another important part, and this is kind of a quote from Adler that I like to kind of consider when I'm looking at that, is do not forget the most important fact that not heredity, not environmental determining factors, but both are giving to the frame and the influence, which are answered in the individual in regard to their styled creative power. So you're looking at heredity, environment, they're not determining factors. They don't tell us, what we have to do, but they do give some a framework for which we can build upon, right? So I love that piece. So this is not deterministic, that we can create a new self-identity, a new self-purpose. So I've seen a lot of people struggle with their background, their childhood, whatever, this trauma. We decide, and again, it's that Viktor Frankl's concept of we decide how we perceive that and how we proceed from there. We may not choose all the things that happen to us in life, but we choose how we react